Say goodbye to your credit card rewards. Greedy corporate mega stores, led by Walmart and Target, are pushing for a law in Congress to take away your hard-earned cash back and travel points to line their pockets. The Durbin-Marshall credit card bill would enact harmful credit card routing mandates that would end credit card rewards as we know it. If you love your credit card rewards, tell your lawmakers, hands off my rewards. Tell them to oppose the Durbin-Marshall credit card bill.
Hey, small business leaders. Have you ever thought there's got to be an easier way to do all this busy work? With JustWorks all-in-one platform, you can check all the boxes, run payroll in 90 seconds, access premium benefits, take care of tax reports, and even hire internationally through JustWorks EOR. Any questions? Reach out to expert staff for real human support. Plus, transparent pricing guaranteed. Visit justworks.com/podcast to join the thousands of small businesses that trust JustWorks to take care of payroll, benefits, compliance, and more.
Welcome to Education in Focus. I'm your host, Eliana Kernodle. A couple laws regarding LGBTQ plus and parental rights in Washington state have led to a lot of controversy. Joining me to discuss this is Chalkboard News editor Brendan Clary. Brendan, let's start with the Parental Bill of Rights, which just took effect. Tell us what it is.
Yeah, Eliana. So Washington State in March, the legislature there implemented a law, right, that was passed on referendum, right? So people voted to have this law introduced by voter initiative, right? And it basically says, like in so many words, like, you know, parents have the right to access material and to have access about their student, you know, information, medical information, you know, and even into like role, like into the classroom. So like they have to be notified if and be able to opt out of different kinds of things like surveys and stuff. And it goes into like what can and can't be asked of students, including like their sexuality, who they're attracted to, like those kinds of things. Like it basically says like parents have a, you know, this right and the responsibility to be involved in their children's education. So that, you know, so that's like kind of the, you know, the thrust of it of like, how do we get that? And we've seen that kind of playing out in a number of different legislatures, right, where people are either lawmakers or voters are very interested in what's going on in schools. And I think a lot of the people that I've spoken to have said that started during the pandemic, right? You had parents at home with their kids kind of for the first time seeing what they're getting in schools and what kinds of instruction they're receiving. And then sort of being very interested in, okay, why is my student taking, you know, this quiz on this subject, or like, why are they being asked about this kind of thing? And sort of being more critical of, you know, these kinds of questions, or being critical of these kinds of like surveys and different kinds of like, you know, sort of cultural issues. So there's a lot of, you know, like hot button cultural fights that are happening in school boards. And I think that's kind of elevated, you know, these kinds of issues. So I think that's really kind of the basis, I think, behind these parental rights sorts of laws.
And it just took effect, but implementation isn't quite going smoothly. What's going on in the courts, and what did the state superintendent have to say?
Yeah, that's a great question. State Superintendent Chris Reykdal, he basically told all the schools in the state, like, hey, we don't need to enforce this because it's being challenged. So they asked the districts not to implement the new law, and basically said students are best supported when their families are actively involved in their education. But if a student does not feel safe coming out to their family and they turn to a trusted adult at their school for support, they have a right to receive that support without fear of being outed by their school. That's a direct quote from Reykdal. So basically, it's this tension that we've seen in other schools and other states like California. This has been a big issue in California of basically these policies. In California, it's been at the school level, right, the district level, where a school district will have a policy that says, hey, like, we have to tell parents if a student is changing their identity or changing their pronouns, changing their name at school. We have to alert the family and let them know that this is going on. And that's gotten a lot of pushback from the state, so the Attorney General in California. So that is kind of the tension there that we're seeing is basically, you know, in allowing parents access to this kind of information. In some cases, you might be outing a student who doesn't feel safe at home, right? So then it's so advocates, you know, are concerned with student safety, and they're saying, you know, we have to do everything we can to protect student safety. And on the other side, you have parents saying, no, we have the right to know about our children. It's very important that we know about what's going on there. So again, we have that sort of tension, and that's what that lawsuit is really all about. And we've seen the ACLU, and in this case, the ACLU filed this along with a number of other plaintiffs asking courts to stop this law from going into effect. And they basically are saying, the same kinds of arguments from what I can tell about these issues, saying, that students have a right to be protected at school and they should be able to come out to a trusted adult at school and not have that go to their parents if their parents are not necessarily, on board with some of these changes. And so I think that it does sort of get at the crux of the issue, which is what kinds of rights do students have and how do parents get in that mix as well, right? How do you give who has the authority over a child? Are children completely autonomous and get to make their own decisions about their sexuality and their gender identity and those kinds of things? Or do parents have to be in the loop? And so it's just a very interesting and sort of complicated legal issue, ultimately, like constitutionally, who gets to decide those kinds of things, and the courts are going through. And then also, can you compel teachers to not talk about certain things to parents? And does that violate their rights, right? So it gets into a lot of different kinds of constitutional questions. And that's what we're going to see here in the courts too, I think, is sort of weighing these things, the balance there of like student protection and also parental rights.
Yeah, and I know they also kind of raise some concerns about like HIPAA laws, and that kind of gets at that question too of students' rights versus parents' rights and like how those are interacting.
Yeah, absolutely.
And at this point, the court just recently denied a motion for a temporary restraining order. Kind of where at in the case are they?
Yeah, I think we're still pretty early. I mean, later this month, June 21st, the court will consider a preliminary injunction, like whether or not to rule on the law. So I think that'll be more of a, that could maybe indicate a little bit about where the case is going to go. But that's later this month. So.
And I suppose that sort of raises an interesting point about what the superintendent is saying, because in a way, what he's saying is sort of trying to do what the courts would do with a temporary restraining order or a preliminary injunction, but he's kind of doing it from his end instead.
Yeah, and I think that there's been some pushback there from Washington Policy Center. There's been some pushback saying basically, he doesn't have the authority to do this and being above what the people have said that they wanted, the legislatures and even the court system. So that sort of violates these kinds of, barriers in place, basically, of the will of the people. You could say that has been circumvented. So I think that, that's sort of a very bold move in terms of the state's, education system there.
Shifting slightly, but still in a similar vein, the legislature just passed a bill on inclusive curriculum. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So, this is in Washington State as well as SB 5462. And it did just pass that. Basically, it's going to try to get the LGBTQ plus community into the curriculum, right? And so basically, I think it's the idea that if you teach students about gender expansive or different kinds of sexual minority figures in history, those kinds of things, then it creates compassion and empathy. And I think that there's like sort of this broader idea in K-12 that you start kids out early and you say, okay, these are just different races in the literature, or different kinds of families, two moms, two dads, different kinds of things like that. Then you can sort of get ahead of what they would say is like homophobia or racism. And so I think that's really the impetus behind this kind of thing, is basically building compassion and empathy. And a lot of that is kind of, I think, related to some of the social emotional learning. And, critics, though, they say stuff like this is a top-down mandate. So there's been a couple of different kinds of criticism of this. One critic has said, hey, this is the Family Policy Institute. Basically, this is not what parents want. And so if you should be able to opt your children out of this kind of thing. Like if you don't want your kids to learn about, some of these sexual topics, right? Or like different kinds of people with different kinds of sexualities, like why are we bringing sexuality into it? So that is a concern of some parents. On the other side, though, you have, a school board member saying like, hey, this should be up to the local school boards. Like, why can't we all decide this at the local community level instead of the state level, right? So, that there's been some like well-rounded criticism of that. But I mean, so you have kind of that tension on both sides, right? You have people saying that we need to do this, and then other people saying like we shouldn't do this for multiple reasons.
Well, Brendan, thank you for your insights on these stories. Listeners can keep up with these stories and more at chalkboardnews.com.
Say goodbye to your credit card rewards. Greedy corporate mega stores, led by Walmart and Target, are pushing for a law in Congress to take away your hard-earned cash back and travel points to line their pockets. The Durbin-Marshall credit card bill would enact harmful credit card routing mandates that would end credit card rewards as we know it. If you love your credit card rewards, tell your lawmakers, hands off my rewards. Tell them to oppose the Durbin-Marshall credit card bill.
Hey, small business leaders. Have you ever thought there's got to be an easier way to do all this busy work? With JustWorks all-in-one platform, you can check all the boxes, run payroll in 90 seconds, access premium benefits, take care of tax reports, and even hire internationally through JustWorks EOR. Any questions? Reach out to expert staff for real human support. Plus, transparent pricing guaranteed. Visit justworks.com/podcast to join the thousands of small businesses that trust JustWorks to take care of payroll, benefits, compliance, and more.